Three Kitchen Horrors, A Canadian Nightmare. Chapter 1, The Watcher in the Shadows. The warm November evening hung heavy with humidity as I stepped into the kitchen of my Sydney apartment. The memory remains vivid, though nearly 3 years have passed since that night. I just returned from my shift at the warehouse, exhausted and hungry, deciding to make myself a simple meal of toast and jam. The apartment complex was old, built sometime in the 1970s, and the kitchen reflected its age. Yellowing linoleum floors, outdated cabinets, and a fluorescent light that always flickered when first turned on. Outside, King Street was unusually quiet for a Friday night in Newtown, the kind of eerie silence that makes you notice sounds you'd normally ignore even in inner Sydney. As I reached for the bread knife to slice the loaf, I noticed something peculiar. A shadow moved across the worn linoleum, sliding from left to right with deliberate slowness. My first instinct was to blame the streetlight outside, maybe a car passing by. But when I glanced toward the window, the blinds were drawn completely shut. My chest constricted. I stood frozen, knife suspended in midair, staring at the empty kitchen before me. The ancient refrigerator hummed its usual drone, but now it seemed amplified, almost synchronized with my accelerating heartbeat. I forced myself to look toward the narrow hallway that connected to my bedroom, half expecting to see someone standing there. Nothing. Just darkness stretching beyond the reach of the kitchen's weak light. "Get it together, Marcus," I whispered to myself, my Australian accent sounding strange in the oppressive silence. The rational part of my brain scrambled for explanations. Shadows from passing headlights, reflection from my phone screen. Anything to explain what I'd seen. But then the floorboards creaked. Not the typical settling of an old building. This was different. Deliberate. The sound came from behind me, near the pantry closet I'd walked past moments ago. Every hair on my arm stood at attention. The cabinets, painted a sickly cream color, seemed to lean inward, their shadows stretching like grasping fingers across the counter. I spun around slowly, scanning every corner of the cramped kitchen. The pantry door stood slightly ajar. Had I left it that way? I couldn't remember. The darkness within seemed denser somehow, more substantial than the shadows in the rest of the room. Another creak, this time from the far corner near the ancient gas stove. My stomach dropped. I grabbed the knife again, holding it awkwardly in my sweating palm. The overhead fluorescent light stuttered, casting the kitchen into brief darkness before sputtering back to life. In that split second of blackness, I could have sworn I saw something shift in the corner. A darker patch within the dark. "Hello?" The word came out as barely more than a hoarse whisper. Silence answered me. Heavy, oppressive silence that pressed against my eardrums. Even the refrigerator seemed to have quieted, as if the entire apartment was holding its breath. I noticed then that the shadow I'd seen earlier hadn't moved. It remained in the same spot near the base of the cabinets, but now I could see it more clearly. Or rather, I could see that it shouldn't exist at all. There was nothing to cast such a shadow. No chair, no appliance, nothing that could create that particular shape. The bread sat forgotten on the counter. My appetite had vanished, replaced by a primal fear that made my legs weak. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to get out of the kitchen, but curiosity, or perhaps something else, kept me rooted to the spot. The shadow began to pulse. Subtle at first, almost imperceptible, like it was breathing, growing slightly larger, then smaller, in rhythm with something I couldn't identify. My rational mind rejected what my eyes were showing me, but the fear crawling up my spine was impossible to deny. I took a step backward, my hip bumping against the kitchen island. The O would groan under the impact, and in response, something in the far corner seemed to react. A soft scraping sound, like fingernails dragging across the tile, echoed through the room. "This isn't real," I muttered, trying to convince myself even as my hands shook harder. Old building, pipes, wind, something logical. But the shadow continued its rhythmic pulsing, and now I could feel it, a presence, invisible but undeniable, watching me from that dark corner. The air had grown noticeably colder. My breath began to fog slightly in front of my face, despite it being room temperature moments ago. The pantry door creaked wider. Just an inch, but enough to make me whimper involuntarily. Through the narrow opening, I could see nothing but blackness, deeper and more complete than should be possible in a small closet with a light switch. I forced myself to move, edging along the counter toward the kitchen entrance. My eyes never left that corner, that impossible shadow that continued its patient, watchful presence. Each step felt like moving through water, my limbs heavy with fear and adrenaline. The knife felt useless in my hand. What good would it do against something that cast shadows with no source? Against something that made the very air feel heavy and watchful? Another scrape. Closer now. The sound seemed to circle around me, though nothing visible moved in the kitchen. My back pressed against the wall near the doorway, and I realized with growing horror that I'd have to turn my back on that corner to leave. The fluorescent light flickered again, longer this time. In the darkness, the shadows seemed to grow, spreading across more of the floor. When the light returned, it had definitely moved closer, now extending past the edge of the island, reaching toward where I stood. "Please," I whispered to the empty room, though I had no idea what I was asking for or who I was asking. The presence in the corner felt patient, eternal, like it had been waiting in this kitchen long before I moved in, and would remain long after I left. The realization made my blood run cold. How many previous tenants had felt this? Had seen the shadow? I finally found the courage to turn, to flee into the hallway, but as I did, I felt something brush past my shoulder. Not a touch exactly, more like a disturbance in the air, a coldness that passed in my shirt and raised goosebumps on my skin. I ran down the hallway into my bedroom, slamming and locking the door behind me. My heart hammered against my ribs as I leaned against the door, gasping for breath. The apartment had returned to its normal sounds. The hum of the refrigerator, the occasional creak of settling wood, distant traffic from the street below. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching, that the shadow remained in its corner, patient and waiting. I never used that kitchen late at night again. Even now, during daylight hours, I moved quickly through it, never lingering, never letting my eyes drift to that corner for too long. The Sydney heat does nothing to warm that space, because sometimes when the light hits just wrong, I can still see it, that impossible shadow, pulsing softly, waiting. Chapter 2, The Opening Cabinets. I'll never forget that December night in my parent house in suburban Toronto, even though I've tried countless times to rationalize what happened. The evening had started normally enough. Mom and Dad had gone to bed early, exhausted from hosting my cousin's baby shower earlier that day. I'd volunteered to stay up and finish the dishes they'd left soaking in the sink. The house was a heritage property, built in 1892, all creaking hardwood floors and original crown molding, beautiful during the day. But at night, especially in winter when the wind whistled through the eaves and snow piled against the windows, it took on a different character entirely. I was in the living room, scrolling through my phone with the television murmuring in the background when I first heard it. A soft click, followed by the quiet groan of wood on wood. At first, I assumed it was just the house settling, a sound so common in these old Toronto homes that most residents learn to tune it out completely. But then it happened again. Click, groan, like a cabinet door being opened slowly, carefully. My stomach tightened. I muted the television, straining to hear better. The sound came again, more distinct now, definitely from the kitchen. Click, groan, then a soft thud, as if the door had been pushed closed again. The pattern repeated. Another cabinet opening, then another, each one distinct, each one deliberate. I set my phone down on the couch, my hands suddenly clammy. "Papa?" I called out softly, not wanting to wake them if they were sleeping, but hoping desperately for an answer. Nothing, just a continued rhythm of opening cabinets echoing from the kitchen. The house felt wrong. The warmth from the radiators couldn't penetrate the cold that had settled into my bones. I stood up slowly, every muscle tense, and crept toward the kitchen doorway. The hallway seemed longer than usual, shadows from the antique sconces creating odd shapes on the floral wallpaper. I reached the kitchen entrance and paused, my hand gripping the doorframe for support. The kitchen was dark except for the ambient light from the hallway, casting everything in shades of gray. And as I watched, frozen in place, one of the upper cabinets, The one where Mom kept a good china, swung open on its own. Not a burst of movement, not a slam, a slow, purposeful opening, as if invisible hands were pulling it outward. The cabinet hung open for a moment, revealing the shadowy outlines of plates and teacups, before gently closing again. Then the next cabinet opened. Same methodical pace, same deliberate movement. "Mom!" I tried to shout, but my voice came out as barely a whisper, choked by fear. I fumbled for the light switch, my hand shaking so badly it took 3 attempts to flip it on. The kitchen flooded with light from the chandelier, a fixture Mom had installed last year, all crystal and modern LED bulbs. Everything looked normal. The cast iron sink, the butcher block island Dad had built, the vintage gas range from the 1950s. Everything except the cabinets. As I watched, the one nearest the refrigerator began to open, slowly, deliberately, in the bright light, with no shadows to blame it on. I could see clearly. There was nothing causing it. No string, no draft, no logical explanation. I laughed nervously, the sound high-pitched and manic in the silent kitchen. Okay, you're tired, Jean-Paul. Long day, you're seeing things. But I wasn't, because as I spoke, another cabinet swung open, this one faster, harder, the door banging against this neighboring cabinet with a sharp crack that made me jump. I grabbed a dish towel from the counter, wrapping it around my hand for, what? Protection? Comfort? I didn't know. My eyes darted from cabinet to cabinet, try and predict which would open next. The lower cabinets began moving now. The one under the sink creaked open, revealing cleaning supplies and the old pipes my man kept meaning to have replaced. Then the one next to it. Then the one across the kitchen. All of them opening in sequence, like a wave moving around the room. And in the gaps between the sounds of opening doors, I heard something else. A soft scraping, like something dragging itself across the tile floor. My breath came in short gasps. The kitchen, so familiar. The place where I'd eaten breakfast every morning of my childhood, where Mom had taught me to make butter tarts and Nanaimo bars, felt alien, hostile. I noticed then that the pattern wasn't random. The cabinets opened in a specific order, starting from the corner near the pantry and moving clockwise around the room. Each door opened wider than the last, and they no longer closed. They simply hung there, gaping like dark mouths, revealing their contents. On the shelves inside the cabinets, the dust had been disturbed. Not everywhere, just in specific spots, as if fingers had traced through it. Long, thin trails through the accumulated grime that Mom had missed during her last cleaning. Who's there? I managed to force out, my voice shaking. What do you want? The scraping sound grew louder, more insistent. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. From behind the refrigerator, from inside the walls, from the darkened pantry in the corner. The pantry. I'd forgotten about the pantry. Its door stood closed, but as I stared at it, I saw the handle begin to turn. Slowly, the old brass knob rotated with agonizing deliberation, catching and reflecting the chandelier light. "No!" I whispered, backing toward the doorway. "No, no, no!" The pantry door swung open, revealing the cluttered interior. Shelves packed with canned goods, boxes of pasta, jars of Mom's homemade preserves. But there was something else, a darkness at the back, deeper than the shadows should allow, that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Every cabinet in the kitchen was now open, creating a strange, unsettling symmetry around the room. The scraping had stopped, replaced by something worse, silence. Complete, oppressive silence that pressed against my eardrums like cotton wool. I could feel it then, the presence, not in any one location, but spread throughout the room, inhabiting the space between the cabinets, lurking in the shadows they cast. Watching me, waiting for something. The chandelier flickered. Once, twice. On the third flicker, it went out completely, plunging the kitchen into darkness broken only by the thin light from the hallway behind me. In that darkness, I heard breathing, slow, measured, coming from the direction of the pantry. Not my breathing, something else's. I turned and ran, my feet slipping on the hardwood floor of the hallway. I took the stairs 2 at a time, not caring about waking my parents anymore, and burst into my bedroom. I slammed the door and locked it, then shoved my desk chair under the handle for good measure. My chest heaved as I tried to catch my breath, ears straining for any sound from below. The house had gone quiet again, but it was the wrong kind of quiet. Expectant, waiting. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my bed, lights blazing, listening to every creak and groan of the old house, the wind howling outside to the Toronto winter night. When dawn finally broke and I heard my parents moving around downstairs, I went down to find the kitchen exactly as I'd left it. Every cabinet hanging open, revealing their contents. Mom looked at me strangely when she saw them. "Jean-Paul, why did you leave everything open?" I couldn't answer. How could I explain that I hadn't opened them? That something else had? That night, Dad installed new cabinet latches, the kind that require a firm push to open. But I knew it wouldn't matter. Whatever had been in that kitchen, whatever had methodically opened every cabinet, wasn't deterred by locks or latches. I moved out 3 weeks later, using university as an excuse. But the truth was, I couldn't stay in that house. Couldn't walk into that kitchen without feeling watched, without expecting to see those cabinets slowly swinging open again, revealing something that should have remained hidden. Chapter 3. The presence at the sink. The evening rain hammered against the windows of my friend Sydney's apartment, creating a percussion that should have been comforting. Derek and I had been roommates for 6 months, and we'd fallen into an easy routine, taking turns cooking dinner, sharing cleanup duties, the simple rhythms of cohabitation. That October night was supposed to be no different. We were preparing spaghetti carbonara, Derek's specialty, laughing about something inconsequential from work. The kitchen was small but modern, all stainless steel and granite countertops, a stark contrast to the heritage building it occupied in Surrey Hills. The overhead lights cast a warm glow, and rain-distorted shadows danced across the walls from the water streaming down the windows. I was at the island, grating Parmesan cheese, while Derek worked at the sink, washing the pot we'd use for pasta. The faucet ran steadily, water splashing against the stainless steel in a rhythmic pattern. Everything was normal, comfortable. Then Derek froze, his hands stilled in the sudsy water, shoulders going rigid. "Marcus," he said quietly, his voice tight with something I couldn't identify. "Yeah." I glanced up from the cheese grater, still smiling. Did something just brush past me?" The smile faded from my face. "What do you mean?" Derek turned slowly, his wet hands dripping onto the floor. His eyes were wide, scanning the kitchen. "Someone just brushed past my shoulder, like actually touched me." I looked around the kitchen. Just the two of us, same as it had been all evening. "Derek, man, there's nobody." "I know what I felt, Marcus." His voice had an edge now, something between fear and frustration. "Something touched me, right here." He gestured to his left shoulder with his chin, not wanting to touch the spot himself. A chill crept into the room, subtle but unmistakable. The hair on the back of my neck prickled. I set down the cheese grater carefully, wiping my hands on a towel. Maybe it was just, I don't know, a draft from the window. But even as I said it, I knew it was wrong. The windows were closed tight against the Sydney rain, and the apartment's heating system hummed steadily. There shouldn't have been any drafts. Derek turned back to the sink, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his movements had become cautious, hesitant. He reached for the dish soap, and the overhead lights flickered, just once, barely noticeable. But we both saw it. "Marcus," Derek said again, softer now. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring into the darkened window above the sink, at his own reflection in the rain-streaked glass. "There's something wrong." I moved closer, despite every instinct telling me to stay back. "What is it?" He didn't answer immediately. The faucet continued to run, water cascading over the forgotten pot. Then, slowly, he lifted one shaking hand and pointed at the reflection in the window. "Do you see it?" I looked. At first, I saw only what I expected. Derek's reflection, my own behind him, the kitchen lights creating a warm glow. But then I noticed something else. A shadow in the reflection, standing just behind Derek's left shoulder. exactly where he'd said something had brushed him. But when I turned to look at the actual space behind Derek, there was nothing there. "Derek, step away from the sink." "I can't." His voice was barely a whisper. "I feel it. It's right behind me. If I move..." The faucet sputtered and the water pressure dropped. The steady stream became a weak trickle, then stopped entirely. In the sudden silence, we could hear something else, a soft, rhythmic sound, like breathing that wasn't coming from either of us. The cabinet under the sink opened, not violently, just a slow, smooth movement, as if someone had carefully pulled it open from the inside. Derek stumbled backward, nearly knocking into me. We both stared at the dark space beneath the sink, where cleaning supplies and old pipes created a maze of shadows. Something moved in those shadows. Not much, just a shift, a change in the darkness that suggested presence without form. The temperature in the kitchen dropped noticeably, our breath beginning to fog. "We need to leave," I said, grabbing Derek's arm. But he was transfixed, staring at the open cabinet, at the shadow window above the sink, at the space where something invisible had touched him. "It's still here," he whispered. "I can feel it watching us." The lights flickered again, longer this time. In the brief darkness, I could have sworn I saw something in that reflection, not just a shadow, but a shape. Almost human. Almost. When the lights returned, the cabinet was still open, but now other things had changed. The knife block on the counter had shifted slightly. A dish towel hung at a different angle. Small things, barely noticeable, but wrong. A soft knock echoed through the kitchen. We both jumped, spinning toward the sound. It had come from the window above the sink. From outside, 3 stories up, where nothing should be able to reach. Knock, knock, knock. Slow, deliberate, patient. "There's no balcony there," Derek said, his voice shaking. "There's nothing outside that window but air." Another knock, louder this time. The window rattled in its frame, rainwater sprang against the glass. But through the distortion of water and darkness, I couldn't see what was making the sound. I grabbed a kitchen towel, wrapping it around my hand like a pathetic shield. "We're leaving. Now." But as we moved toward the kitchen entrance, the scraping started. Soft at first, almost imperceptible beneath the sound of rain. Then louder, clearer, something dragging across the tile floor, circling around the island, moving between us and the door. Derek's hand found mine, and we stood frozen, backs pressed together, watching the empty kitchen. The overhead lights flickered constantly now, creating a strobe effect that made everything seem to jump and shift. The shadow in the window grew larger. The breathing sound intensified, and then a cold pressure against my shoulder. Exactly like Derek had described. Light but undeniable, like invisible fingers pressing into my shirt. "Do you feel it?" Derek asked, and I could hear the terror in his voice mirrored in my own. "Yes." The pressure moved, sliding down my arm, leaving a trail of goosebumps and cold sweat. It wasn't rough or violent. That might have been less terrifying. Instead, it was gentle, almost curious, as if whatever was touching us was examining us. The faucet burst to life, water spraying everywhere, soaking the counter and floor. The cabinet under the sink slammed shut, then opened again. Every drawer in the kitchen began to rattle, handles jumping and shaking as if something inside was trying to get out. "Run!" I shouted, and we bolted. We stumbled over each other, crashing through the kitchen entrance into the living room. I could hear Derek's ragged breathing, could feel my own heart hammering so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. Behind us, the kitchen had gone silent. No running water, no rattling drawers, just stillness. We sat on the couch, shaking, staring at the darkened kitchen entrance. Neither of us spoke for a long time. The rain continued outside, but it seemed muted now, distant. "We're not going back in there tonight," Derek finally said. "We're not going back in there ever," I replied. But of course we did, in the morning light. With the rain past and sunshine streaming through the windows, the kitchen looked normal, everything in its place. No water on the floor, no open cabinets. as if the night before had been a shared delusion, except we both knew it wasn't. We moved out of that apartment 2 weeks later, neither of us willing to spend another night in a place where something invisible could touch us, could breathe beside us, could knock on windows 3 stories above the ground. Sometimes I still feel it, that light pressure on my shoulder, that sensation of being touched by something that shouldn't exist. And whenever I'm near a kitchen sink, whenever I see my reflection in a darkened window, I remember some presences don't need to be seen to be real. Some touches don't need a body to leave their mark. And some kitchens, no matter how modern, how bright, how familiar, can hide things that are patient and watching and waiting for the next person to stand at the sink alone.